Welcome back to the history of the papacy in 10 minutes or less. At least we try, definitely no more than 15 minutes. And thank you for joining us today. Now, today's episode is a really special episode for a couple of different reasons. One, this is a part of an episode that I recorded a couple of years back with the three guys from the Come and Take It Texas History Podcast. Now, you can go over to their website, brainstaple.com, to listen to hours and hours of great content on the history and culture of Texas. Today's episode is a really interesting crossover between Texas history and church and papal history in the mission system of Texas. So I won't go into too much of it now, but I think you'll see that it's a very fascinating topic. Before we go, I want to really thank our patrons on Patreon at patreon.com/history of the papacy. You really go a long way to helping this whole operation keep going, so I very much appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this, and when new episodes are published, click like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and I will talk to you soon.
The most famous and hallowed shrine of Texas history is the Alamo in San Antonio. It's famous for the stand taken there by the Texas revolutionaries against the forces of Mexican dictator Santa Anna. But before it became a fortress, it was a mission serving a very different purpose, to bring Spanish civilization and Christianity to Native American tribes. In this, it wasn't alone, as there were dozens of missions in the Spanish Texas and the New World, all formed for this purpose.
The Reconquista served as a model for how the Spanish would organize their colonization efforts in North America. After establishing dominance over the native civilizations and peoples that they encountered, the Spanish built forts called presidios, which could easily defend the small towns called pueblos. Religious missions would be set up to teach Christianity to the natives near the pueblos and presidios. The intent of this system was to secure new areas to build commerce and then to Hispanicize and ultimately Christianize the native populations. This system spread through Mexico and Central America, as well as parts of South America.
Most of the early mission and presidio activity in the southwest U.S. was focused on the upper Rio Grande Valley of New Mexico, specifically around the town of Santa Fe. In the 1680s, though, a revolt by the Pueblo Indians drove the Spanish out for a decade. Some Christianized tribes that wished to remain under Spanish protection moved south to the lower Rio Grande. A presidio and mission had already been established in the 1650s at a crossing in the river before the Rocky Mountains began. They called this town on the south bank of the river El Paso del Norte, which today is Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. After the revolt, El Paso became the main northern Spanish settlement, and a tribe of Tigua Indians moved to El Paso and were settled into the Mission Corpus Christi de la Isleta del Sur. The mission itself, as well as several parts of El Paso del Norte, eventually found themselves on the north bank of the river as it changed its course. Isleta is today considered the true first mission of Texas. Over the next few years, other missions and presidios were established down the valley, which became later known as the Gateway Missions. Soon the eyes of the Spanish Empire started to turn eastward into Texas itself.
Governor Alonso de Leon approved the request of Franciscan priests to set up new missions among the Caddo Hasinai tribes who lived in what is now East Texas. They had been friendly to de Leon when he had been in Texas looking for La Salle. They were so friendly, the Spanish took to calling them Tejas, which was a Caddo word for friends. This is where we get the word Texas.
Before we go forward in the story of Texas, let's take a moment to look at the monastic orders who ran the mission system: the Dominicans, Augustinians, Franciscans, and Jesuits. They were all founded at various times in history as missionary movements, so they were finely tuned machines for spreading the Christian message. What is interesting about these monastic orders was that they didn't answer or report to any local authorities, either religious or secular. Monks lived and worked in monasteries, and in the New World, the missions combined the aspects of the European monastery with the added responsibility of evangelizing and civilizing the native peoples in the area. These monastic orders were what we would think of today as NGOs or non-governmental organizations. They could do some great things because they were outside of the normal chain of command, but they could also be unpopular with the local authorities who had little or no control over them.
In Texas, the Franciscan monastic order was the primary order responsible for the founding of the missions. The Jesuits, Augustinians, and Dominicans joined in to a much lesser degree in Texas and northern Mexico.
In Texas, the Franciscans worked much more closely with the Spanish authorities, but still maintained their independent streak. In 1690, they established the first mission in Texas, Mission San Francisco de los Tejas, located between present-day Crockett and Nacogdoches in East Texas. The Caddo people in the area were somewhat receptive to the priests.
The Mission San Antonio de Valero was moved in 1718 from the south side of the Rio Grande to a bend in the San Antonio River about a third of the way between Eagle Pass and the Sabine. The Spanish also built a presidio in town, both called San Antonio de Bejar, near the mission, which sat along the road St. Denis had mapped a few years before. Over the next 20 years, another mission, Mission San Jose y San Miguel de Aguayo, was established a few miles down the San Antonio River, and 3 others that had failed in East Texas, Mission Concepcion, Mission San Juan Capistrano, and Mission San Francisco de las Tejas, now called Espada, were also moved nearby. San Antonio would become the center of religious, cultural, and military life in Texas.
Other missions and presidios were founded throughout Texas. Mission Nuestra Senora del Espíritu Santo de Zuniga was founded in 1721 near the Presidio of La Bahia, which was on the coast near the ruins of La Salle's fort. Both moved several times until they finally settled on a spot between San Antonio and the coast, and a pueblo also called La Bahia sprang up nearby. Another mission was founded in Los Eighties, which was set up as a presidio town a few miles away from the French settlement of Natchitoches. Los Eighties wasn't actually in Texas, but is in fact in today's Louisiana, but for a while it was the capital of Texas. Another mission was founded in 1716 near the Los Tejas site called Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe de los Nacogdoches. In the 1770s, the mission was closed, but the town that had formed around it remained, becoming the town of Nacogdoches. Other missions were formed in South Texas on the Nueces as well as in the towns of San Patricio and Refugio. Finally, a mission and presidio, both called San Saba, were founded on the edge of the plains in 1757 to serve the Apache who were thought to live there in the area, and to explore the possibility of silver mining. What the Spanish found instead was that it was deep inside of Comanche territory, and they were not particularly receptive to missionary activity. In 1758, war broke out between the Spanish and the Comanche, and the mission was utterly destroyed, and they were pretty much driven out of Comancheria permanently.
Life in the missions, presidios, and pueblos fit quite well into the medieval social order of those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. Prayer, work, educating the local native population, and planning for future missionary activities wouldn't have left the monks of the New World mission with a lot of downtime. Prayer was obviously a huge part of mission life, and the monks prayed the divine offices, the 9 times a day prayer cycle, plus normal masses and other liturgical celebrations. It wasn't all fun and praise, though. The monks worked incredibly hard in brutal conditions, and were forced to be jacks of all trades. The missions of Texas were a long way down the supply chain from the parts of Mexico where manufactured goods could be procured. The monks needed to grow their own food, make their own horseshoes, plow blades, nails, and whatever else they needed on their own forges. Constructing and maintaining buildings, and even creating religious art would be an everyday occurrence in the mission.
The decline of the mission system was written into its DNA. The mission system wasn't meant to last forever. As new areas were colonized, it was only a matter of time before a colony would be settled enough for regular diocesan and civil control to take over. For the bishops and the governors, the monastic orders were good when they were expanding Spanish control, but they did not like the order's independence. The shift from the devoutly Catholic Habsburgs to the less pious Bourbons led to the church gradually losing influence in the Spanish court. The rise of other European powers in the Americas didn't help either. The British and later Americans pushed in on Spanish territory, and they didn't have much time for Catholic religious orders.
The decline in Texas was a bit different. As the San Saba mission experience showed, the Native American tribes in the North, Central, and West Texas were resistant to missionary activity. The Plains Indians, with their horse culture, simply had no need and less desire to settle down and Christianize. There was also less money and less need for the mission component of the colonial system. Many of the larger tribes had more interest in the trade and interaction that came through the pueblo and presidios than the strictures of the missions. In Mexico, the empire began to secularize, and the power of independent monastic orders became less important. Because of the cost and defensibility, most missionary activity devolved into San Antonio, the border, and South Texas, such as La Bahia and Refugio. The growth of the Tejano cattle ranching industry in the first years of the 19th century was fueled by a desire from a few large landowners to graze their land on mission territory. Most of the missions declined, and their residents gradually became absorbed into the Tejano and Mexican culture.
After the independence of Mexico, this combined with secularization of the new Republican government to spell the final end of the mission system in Texas. As countries gained their independence from Spain, they wanted control over the important institutions of the chains of fortresses, missions, and towns. Throughout the 1820s, most of the missions in San Antonio were abandoned, as were the ones in La Bahia and Refugio. Flooding of the Rio Grande and El Paso in 1829 moved the river path and destroyed the missions there serving the Isleta and Socorro. San Antonio de Valero had been secularized in 1806 and became the main presidio in San Antonio. It was initially occupied by soldiers from Coahuila, from an area known as Alamo de Parras, which resulted in a new name for the old mission, the Alamo. By 1830, there were no active missions in Texas. The Alamo mission itself is probably the most recognizable remnant of the mission period in Texas. Battles in the Texas Revolution were fought near the Refugio, Concepcion, and Espada missions, but it was the stand that Bowie, Travis, and Crockett took there that has permanently etched itself into Texas legacy. There would be no Alamo if it were not for the desire of the church to spread Christianity to the Native Americans of Texas.
That wraps things up for today. You can find notes and links from today's show at brainstable.com. We hope you'll join us next time, and remember that even if you aren't from Texas, Texas wants you anyway.